Welcome to Got a Friend. This is Will Sanchez. Thank you for tuning in. I am honored to have as my special guest, Dr. Keith Benkov. He is a doctor at Mount Sinai, specializing in pediatrics, helping our youngsters overcome Crohn's disease and related diseases. I am thrilled to have Dr. Benkov as a guest.
Thank you, Will. I'm very happy to be here.
Doctor, I need to congratulate you. You just did your 30th New York City Marathon this past, in fact, earlier this month.
Correct.
Congratulations.
And I'm almost recovered from it, too.
I saw that you think it might be your last. Is it a final decision?
Unfortunately, we get older, not younger, and a couple of ailments are catching up to me, and the race was wonderful. The race carries yourself, but training for it was very hard. And every long run felt like a marathon itself. So it took me that long to recover, and I couldn't put all the mileage in that I wanted to. So plus I'm afraid of hurting myself in the future.
Okay, well, that's a sensible fear. You don't want to do that. You're an important member of the medical community, and you have all these patients that rely on. In fact, one of those patients is our mutual friend, Evan Wood, and he ran the 2017 marathon, probably one of many of your students, patients, and colleagues.
Well, it's an interesting confusion between patients and students. You really like to influence your patients, and if you could set a goal for them or set them on the right path, it's wonderful. It's not like being a parent, but it can almost match it sometimes. And Evan's a wonderful young man who I guess I've known for probably 9-10 years already. So I knew him when he was much younger, and I saw him develop, and it's been a very nice relationship.
Excellent. I'm sure he sees you as a second dad because, as we know, he lost his real dad very young. Yeah. For a very young person, he's had a lot of losses. Yeah, well, one of his doctors, I guess one of your colleagues,
one of our doctors who initially started taking care of him died soon after he was diagnosed, and he was left in a lurch. But the most important thing is that he has tremendous resilience, which is something we look for we look for in ourselves, we look for in patients, we look for in everybody. And if we could figure out how to improve resilience, I think everyone would be a lot better for it.
Oh, absolutely. But interesting, as you know, I had him here, Evan here. He was, I guess 2 years ago, he ran representing Manhattan in the 5-borough challenge, the Foot Locker. He just happened to come in first. But I saw that he was probably the fastest finisher among the Team
IBDKids, inflammatory bowel disease kids, because we're pediatric specialists, and inflammatory bowel disease is sometimes confused with irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome is something where someone has spasms and stomach pain, and sometimes they can't pass a bowel movement, sometimes they have too many bowel movements. But inflammatory bowel disease is a real disease. It's made up of 2 diseases, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, and it needs a lot of treatment and watching. Irritable bowel syndrome is something that probably 70 million adult Americans have. It's the so-called nervous stomach, and again, it's real, but it's not a disease, doesn't need medication, probably responds to diet and stress reduction. As a matter of fact, I think running might even treat irritable bowel syndrome very well, too.
All right. So let's introduce you to our audience, Doctor. Tell us where you were born and something about your growing up years.
I'm a New Yorker through and through. I'd like to try to get rid of my accent, but I can't.
Your New York accent, you mean?
My New York accent. I was born in Brooklyn for my first 5 years, and then we moved to Queens. And Queens, I was there for 10 years, my formative years growing up. And Queens, my age, my generation, being post-war baby boomers, was wonderful. We kept ourselves busy on the street, not doing good things, not bad things, but we played every sport that there was, and even made up sports that didn't exist. School was important. Your friends were important. And then we moved to Long Island for high school, and even I went to college on Long Island too, so that continued the New York theme. High school was tough. It was a big school. I had skipped a grade when I was in Queens, and now I was with much bigger classmates, and I couldn't play sports the way I wanted. So I focused on my studies to get into a good school, and I knew I wanted to be a doctor from an early age. I think a lot of people of my generation did, Both my grandfathers were shopkeepers, and they worked 14-hour days and 7 days a week. And I always hold them as the standard of what hard work is. And anything less for me was easy to do schoolwork compared to working in a store. So I just applied myself, and I eventually got to medical school.
Excellent. So your parents made sure you had that opportunity. Did you have siblings?
I have a younger sister.
Okay. Did she go on to be a doctor too?
No, she went into finance.
Finance. All right. Well, you need a good accountant or CPA person in the family.
My father was a CPA, and I think, as very often is true, you never want to do what your father does. He especially in tax season, he also worked long hours, and I don't know. I mean, I ended up working long hours myself, but it was always something that was nice because every day you felt like you were doing something good.
Yeah.
You didn't have to question it.
When you love your work, you're not really working. Your interest is in the pediatrics. So where did that come from?
Well, I always liked kids. I had a pediatrician in Brooklyn who I idolized. And as I was going to medicine, I always thought I would go into pediatrics, but I wanted to keep an open mind. In college, I started working in a sleepaway camp. And the camp actually was run by a lot of teachers because that's what they did over the summer when they were off. Mostly gym teachers, phys ed teachers, and they were really into track. And as a counselor, I really didn't do track because the kids did track. I just supervised. But I got the idea that maybe running could be a good thing. These phys ed teachers would wake up before camp started and they would go out running themselves. And they weren't, the fastest, but they just did it. They were approaching middle age and they wanted to stay in shape. So that planted an idea that, running might be a good thing. When I went back to college during the winter, I might run occasionally, but it was also the time I went to college in the early '70s, and it was the same time that Frank Shorter won gold in the Olympic marathon. And that was quite a story because I don't think running had gathered that much attention, especially long distance running. But still in college, you're busy with other things. It's a lot of pressure of studying. I didn't realize that at the time that running could be a relief to pressure. So I really didn't pick it up till medical school.
Which medical school did you go to?
I went to 2 medical schools. I actually started medical school in Guadalajara, Mexico.
Oh, okay.
And there it was a beautiful climate. We used to play a lot of basketball and tennis, but then once we got down to studies, there was no time to organize those sports, and that's when I started running. I also had the experience of, in my first year of medical school in anatomy, we had to dissect cadavers, and my cadaver was terribly overweight. And you can't imagine how difficult it is cutting through a fat cadaver. There was grease all over the place, and it just became very visual how bad it is to be overweight. And I was never terribly overweight. I just didn't keep track. And after seeing that, I said, gee, if I'm going into medicine, I really should do something to be in the best shape. And then when it's my time to go, I want to be lean. I don't want to be
a good-looking, lean
cadaver, right? So the next medical student who's doing the dissection doesn't have as much problems as I did.
I see.
So I started running, and the weather was great. Guadalajara is at 5,000 feet altitude. And even though it's fairly close to the equator, the 5,000 feet really make it a very nice temperate climate. And I just kept running, and I actually was fortunate enough that I was able to score high on my tests. I actually transferred to Mount Sinai School of Medicine. I technically don't even have to say I'm from Guadalajara, and maybe for 20 years I didn't even admit it. But as I've gotten older, I've accepted it as an important part of my life, and very crucial. It was very formative. So I finished medical school at Mount Sinai right here in New York, and I was out for a run in the fall of '77, and on First Avenue, and all these people were running by. And I said, I'm going to run it next year. So in my last year of medical school in 1978, I trained, and I got into the marathon. Now the marathon was interesting then because anyone could get in if you applied early enough. So we started a tradition of lining up at the post office at the given night to hand in our self-addressed envelopes, and then they would mail it back to you, and then you would turn it around. And then after a couple of years, the post office got so tired of us that they did in the park, and you would hand in your envelope. And then there were too many, and that's when they started switching to the lottery and the whole system there.
Right. And that was the five-borough.
The five-borough started, I believe, in 1976, and my first one was 1978.
Okay. Well, you told the story that when Mary Wittenberg became president of the New York Roadrunners, I didn't realize that's when the charity program started.
Yeah.
And you had an idea.
Yeah, well, it was good luck. This was several years later. Of course, Fred Lebo and Alan Steinberg, for many years, were in charge of the race and New York Roadrunners. And I get busy with work. I don't know all the details, but Mary was recruited. Mary's story is well known too. I don't want to get facts wrong, but she was a corporate lawyer and
a good runner too.
And a good runner too. I think almost qualified for the Olympic trials. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to institute this charity partners program where certain charities would field teams. And by now, it was very hard to get into the marathon. Fortunately, I was lucky because after running 15 New Yorks, you're in automatically. We, mostly through the Rudin family, who I'm very grateful to, we were granted a team. And we were, this wasn't Mount Sinai Medical Center. This was our own little department doing research in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis in children. So we were given 30 runners, and it was the first year. There were only 12 other charities at the time. It was very new. It was a new concept, and then over the subsequent years, it exploded.
Oh, yeah. It's not that easy to get in. You have to meet certain qualifications.
No, it's a wonderful program. But what happened was that everyone was raising money, and people are basically asking each other for money. And since most of the runners are on the young side, they don't have as many contacts. Their contacts don't have as much wealth, and it's really very difficult. So what we did, it's been 12 years that we've been doing this. We've raised over $3 million.
Excellent.
And what's happened is we eventually started taking only parents or relatives of children with inflammatory bowel disease because they had the best interest. And it was a thrilling experience for them because they really felt like they were giving back. Medical care in this country is under assault. It's very hard to give good medical care. There are so many obstacles. And through some research techniques and other things, we were actually able to overcome a lot of things. But the parents just loved it. And for me, it was thrilling to be part of their experience of doing something positive. And after a few more years, I guess, as my patient population was aging, some of my own patients were able to run too. It takes a big commitment to train for a marathon.
Yep.
The right type of maturity. You have to be physically well, which we like to think most of our patients are with good treatment. And what a tremendous thrill to be able to run with these young adults who've had the disease and to have them out there showing that they don't have to be different from anyone else. Too often when someone has a disease, it becomes their banner. It becomes part of their identity. And I think it's, no one should be embarrassed or inhibited to talk about their disease, but you don't want it to be your whole existence.
Yeah.
So these young adults really showed how well and healthy they are.
Well, some credit belongs to you and the other doctors to encouraging them.
Well,
and Crohn's disease, it's advertised on TV and that always rushing to the bathroom. And so obviously something people don't want to talk about.
It's not the most media-friendly disease. I mean, I think fortunately or unfortunately, because of all the commercial interests, it's getting a lot of advertisements on TV for some of the new medications.
Yeah.
We really don't like that to be the banner of the disease either, because people might get the wrong impression. But it's a very treatable disease, but right now we don't have a cure for it.
Is the disease mostly a young person's disease?
Interestingly, it is mostly a young person's disease. The peak incidence is in the teen years and the 20s. And there's another peak in the 50s, but for the most part, it's a little bit unusual because most diseases come with age, and this is coming a little bit early. It's also coming at a time when I mentioned my formative years. It's coming when they really are supposed to be developing, growing, maturing, and here they have a disease to deal with, and It's not pleasant, and it really takes the whole family unit, the the medical community, lots of resources to really normalize their childhood and their teenage years.
Well, you're doing an excellent job because, I had to have one patient, Evan, and
Oh, well.
he's remarkable in many ways.
Yeah, well, Evan is terrific, and we have lots of wonderful patients, but Evan is charismatic, loquacious young adult that you want everyone.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he's actually going to television too. He's doing television and film.
Yes, graduated from New York University Film School, so he's done a few things. And I think he worked on Homeland. For a young person, he's had a tremendously enriched life.
Having Crohn's disease really taught me to respect my body's limitations and to know when is too far or too hard. Marathoning restored my belief that hard work and resilience can be rewarded. Being a teenager with Crohn's is difficult because you're not just worrying about your health and your social life, but you're also trying to write that 8th grade English paper. I've had to overcome a lot of challenges, but my story is not a doom and gloom story. This is just the beginning.
He gives you guys all the credit because he runs on behalf of your team.
Well, we want to figure out what makes Evan tick so that we can bring it to some other patients. And we have lots of patients who are very self-sufficient and inspirational, but Evan's always in the middle of everything. I don't know if you found out with Evan too, but Evan really was discovered when he finished, maybe it was his second marathon. He came across the finish line in a very exuberant pose, and some camera caught him, and then he became the poster boy for the next year's marathon. All of the subway. Mount Sinai also loves him because he's a very good spokesperson, so he's done some work for Mount Sinai, all gratis, of course. And then he ran the 5-borough, and he got more publicity. He found another picture that they used this year of him. It's very interesting.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. That's great. Now, going back to you, you've done 30 marathons?
I finished 30 New York City marathons. I had 3 other New York City marathons that I somewhat count. 2 were do not finishes.
Oh, okay.
But he still trained and it felt like a marathon, right?
Okay.
So no one's perfect. And then there was one of my favorite marathons was the 2012 marathon, the Sandy marathon, because first it was very disappointing. I never blame them for calling that off.
You did the run anyway.
I did the run. Is that what your shirt is? Okay. So, we have a whole tradition in my family of going out the night before. And we actually have a dinner 2 nights before for the team. And everyone basically canceled on that Friday night dinner because that's when the announcement came out. And so what should have been a table of 15 was a table of 4. We not only did we run anyway, but we ate anyway. And it was a little bit of a depressing thing. Someone who was from out of town and had made the trip and it was too late to cancel.
Yeah. Too late for a lot of people.
Yeah. And then the next night we went out with my family and we figured we had the reservations anyway, we would go. And my son, who was much more into social media than I was, and this was not that I am now either, but I'm okay now. But this was 2012, got on his phone that they were organizing this run. And, it was such a nice, spontaneous thing that you just showed up. It was a very brisk morning, and you did your own laps around the park. And my family, who's come out every time, and my brother-in-law ran the last loop with me just to keep me going. And
Evan ran with you a little bit.
And Evan laughed me like he should. It was really nice, spontaneous, old-fashioned. You didn't need all the hoopla, the corporate sponsors and everything. People gave you water without, water stations.
Ad hoc water stations were made.
And no one felt.
That's why I took on their mantra. I love the story.
No.
I've had the founders of that event on my show.
Oh, that's wonderful. But
Lance and Todd.
No,
and
that's
a
wonderful.
terrific gentleman from New Jersey. The quick story is Lance was running that marathon on behalf of his uncle, Uncle Roy, who passed away from brain cancer. And it was fundraising. And so when the event was canceled, he understood, but he said, but I have to run it anyway, because I really needed to honor my marathon miles, my charity miles, as he called it.
Mm-hmm.
So he figured other people want to do it. So before he went to bed Friday night, Facebook, social media, hey, I'm going to run this anyway. Yeah. Anybody want to join me at 7 in the Green on Sunday? Next day, Saturday morning, Saturday morning. The marathon is the next day, Saturday morning, has 50 or 60, 70 people signing up. He goes, I think I got a thing here. It just took off.
It took off. It was
took
wonderful.
off. 3,000, 4,000 people showed up on Sunday. They all heard about it through social media.
no.
Even people from foreign countries, like there were, I think, Brazilians or French were in town, and they said, the people were told, go to Tavern on the Green, take off.
I played the national anthem right before. People were running with banners, you know, of their countries, and it was you know, I still, it was a beautiful, sunny but cold day, and it was, and it's interesting. That's the only, I've always saved my shirts as souvenirs. I never wore a marathon shirt except that one. It's the only one I ever ran. My wife actually took my early marathon T-shirts when they were cotton, and had them made into a quilt. Which was nice, but I still have this shoebox of I don't know, 20 odd, you know, I don't know how many shirts.
You said that there's no cure for Crohn's disease, but I would imagine they're making improvements every year because of the research. So what can we look? What can patients who have Crohn's disease or just been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, what could they look forward to in the next few years?
Well, you know, the medical field is still very focused on medicine. Fortunately or unfortunately. So a lot of times they're still looking at some very significant medicine, which has really changed the disease. But the most interesting research probably has to do with the effect of diet and the bacteria in our intestines, because it seems there's a tremendous link between what you eat and what bacteria you have. And there might be certain bacteria that are going to be able to prevent Crohn's, or there might be certain diets that are going to promote bacteria that will prevent Crohn's. So we have between 10 trillion to 100 trillion different bacteria in our intestine. And the makeup, the constituency is different from everybody. And it's almost like your fingerprint, you know. But there are also similarities between people eating the same diet, eating in the same location. So in some parts of the world, they see very little Crohn's. But if those people immigrate to the United States, their risk of Crohn's goes up 5 times.
Because the diet changes?
We think either something's protecting them in their native countries or something is detrimental here. The other interesting thing, too, is that as certain places in the world become more industrialized and more westernized, so to speak, the rate of Crohn's goes up, too. So there is probably something about diet, and unfortunately there's so many theories and everyone wants to be an expert on it, and there's not enough evidence to point to what diet it is. But I think we're slowly making progress, and I think diet and the bacteria are going to have a big role in the future, which will be much nicer than medicine. On the other hand, you know, the pharmaceutical industry it's a big industry, and that's why Crohn's disease is in everyone's consciousness, because they're constantly advertising.
Yeah.
And,
get this drug, that drug.
Drug, and it's really not a good thing. I don't know. You know, we're very grateful that we have drugs, but it shouldn't be proposed that everyone should be on certain drugs.
Yeah. So you're looking forward to perhaps identifying this helpful bacteria, the right kind of diet, the Mediterranean diet everybody talks about. And these diets are also related to longevity too. You know, there's certain parts of the world that people live for a long time, and it's always the diet.
It always comes to the diet, and it's not. And you know, health and longevity is multifactorial, so it's not like the same thing. But I think diet is a big part of it, and I think exercise is a big part. As I get older, I have contemporaries that really are not well, and some of them are doctors. And I don't think the medical field always takes that good a care of themselves. Some doctors do, but many don't. And but I just see a tremendous differences how my contemporaries are faring, just based on what their activity levels were, so. My own parents were great examples of that too. My grandparents, the shop owners, died in their 60s. I was lucky enough to know them. My parents, I think weren't particularly active people. I like to think I inspired them by when I started running in medical school. They didn't start running, but they started biking. And my parents biked all over the world on trips and locally.
Wonderful.
And my father lived till just short of his 84th birthday, but he was healthy right to the end and developed metastatic melanoma. From the time of his diagnosis to his death was only 8 weeks. Right before that, we took him down to Washington to see the World War II monument. He was a vet, and he walked 8 miles on the Mall 2 weeks before he was diagnosed.
Wow.
He was in that kind of shape. And my mother, God bless her, will be 91 next year.
Okay.
Still goes to the gym 5 days a week, keeps track of how many steps she has on her Fitbit, and is a tremendous inspiration. So
Great. And she has grandchildren? You have children?
I have children. Yeah.
Great. They're saying good family relations and a good attitude, and also helps in preventing disease and having friends.
Yeah, no. It's well, when you run, you get lots of friends. It's it's a very interesting thing. When you train early in the morning, you're by yourself. But on the weekends, it becomes like a party almost. Who you meeting up to run with, what groups you're running with. I mean, some of my best friends are people I've run with over the years. I've outrun some of them. Not everyone can run forever. And I thought I would run forever almost, but I guess I'm gonna run almost forever. I'm not gonna be able to marathon forever.
Just moving is a great benefit to your health and happiness and well-being. Listen, Doc, on that note, keep on running.
You gotta run.